After 16 years in prison, he returns to his ranch, but what he finds changes everything. David Miller held tightly to the small cardboard suitcase that contained all his belongings. 16 years had passed since he left his rural property, and now, at 45, he walked down the dirt road toward what he hoped was his home. The orange jumpsuit still clung to his sweaty body as he spotted in the distance the familiar outlines of the mountains surrounding his property. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The house that should have been painted white with blue details, cared for by his wife Sarah, now appeared as a decaying shadow against the cloudy sky. David's steps slowed as he approached the front gate. What should have been a moment of joy turned into a nightmare. The wooden gate was down, half-rotted. The fences he had built with his own hands were knocked over, and tall weeds had taken over everything. "My God," he murmured, letting the suitcase fall to the dusty ground. The main house, once the pride of the Miller family, now had a partially collapsed roof. The windows were broken and vines climbed the peeling walls. The garden that Sarah tended with such care had turned into a jungle of weeds. David felt his legs buckle. Where was his wife? Where were Jason and Rachel, his children who were only 8 and 6 when he was arrested? 16 years. They were adults now, and he had lost everything. Walking through the rubble of what was once his life, David noticed movement in a small building at the back of the property. It was the old tool shed, which seemed to be in better shape than the rest. Smoke rose from the small makeshift chimney. "Someone's here!" he shouted, feeling a mix of hope and suspicion. The door of the small building opened slowly, and a lady with grey hair appeared. She must have been about 70, and David had difficulty recognizing her. Then his eyes widened. "Mrs. Martha?" The old neighbor who lived a few miles away stared at him with an expression of surprise and compassion. Martha Halloway had always been a woman of strong character, known in the area for her kindness and wisdom. "David, my boy," she said, her voice choked. "You came back." "Mrs. Martha, what happened here? Where is Sarah? Where are my children?" The woman motioned for him to come closer and enter the small cabin she had turned into her temporary home. The interior was simple but clean, with some basic furniture and old photographs hanging on the wall. "Sit here, son. I need to tell you something that's going to hurt a lot." David sat on a wooden chair, his hands trembling. 16 years in prison had not prepared him for this moment. "Sarah." Martha paused, choosing her words carefully. "She held on strong for 2 years after you were arrested. Tried to keep the property, take care of the children, but it got harder and harder. And then? She sold everything, David. Sold the property and left with the children. That was 14 years ago. The world seemed to collapse on David. He had dreamed every day in prison of the moment he would return home, hug his family, rebuild his life. He never imagined there would be nothing to return to. "What do you mean she sold it? She couldn't sell without my authorization." "Yes, she could, son. When you were convicted, she became the legal responsible for everything. And there were debts. Many debts." David got up from the chair and began to pace back and forth in the small cabin. His mind swarmed with questions and a growing anger. "Debts for what? I left everything in order." "I don't know all the details, but I remember there were demands from lawyers, overdue taxes, loans you had taken out to buy equipment. Sarah tried to honor everything, but the money ran out." Mrs. Martha got up and went to a small wooden chest in the corner of the cabin. From there, she pulled out a shoebox tied with a string. When she left, she asked me to look after the property and keep some things. She said, "If you ever came back, I should give you this." David took the box with trembling hands. Inside, he found family photographs, some yellowed letters, and a small key. "What key is this?" "From the safe you had hidden behind the living room bookcase. Sarah couldn't open it. She said only you knew the combination." David ran out of the cabin toward the main house. The living room was destroyed, but he managed to find the remains of the wooden bookcase. Behind it, covered in debris, was the small steel safe. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. With nervous fingers, David spun the combination. The the birth date of Jason, his eldest son. The safe opened with a metallic click. Inside were some documents, a small amount of cash that was now almost worthless due to inflation, and a letter with his name written in Sarah's handwriting. Sitting among the rubble of his former living room, David carefully opened the letter. His wife's words, written 14 years ago, seemed to leap off the page. "My dear David, if you are reading this, it means you have come home. Forgive me for not being here to welcome you. I tried to resist. I tried to keep our family together, but the circumstances became impossible. The children needed stability, a life away from the demands and the shame. I am going to my sister Victoria's house on the Florida coast. The boys ask about you every day. I always tell them that Daddy is far away, but that he loves us very much. One day when you get out, I hope you can find us and forgive us. With eternal love, Sarah." David folded the letter and kept it close to his chest. Tears rolled down his bearded face as he looked at the wreckage of his former life. Mrs. Martha had followed him and was watching him in silence. "Mrs. Martha, do you know exactly where they went?" "I know it was to a coastal city, to a sister of Sarah's house. But that was a long time ago, my son. People change, they move, they rebuild their lives. I need to find them. I need to explain what really happened back then." The old woman approached and placed a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "First you need to get settled, rebuild your life. Then we'll think about finding your family." "How am I going to get settled if I have nothing left? The property was sold. I have no money, no job." "Who was the property sold to?" "To a businessman from New York City, a certain William Sterling. He bought it cheap and was planning to build a housing development here, but it seems the project never got off the ground." David stood up and walked around the property, trying to recognize every piece of land that was once his. The fruit trees he planted were dead or diseased. The corral where he raised cattle was collapsing. The artesian well he dug with so much effort was clogged. If the project never got off the ground, why is everything abandoned like this? William Sterling bought not only your property, but 3 others here in the area. He tore down some houses, started grading the land. But then it seems the environmental agencies halted the work. Since then, everything has been at a standstill. A spark of hope shone in David's eyes. If the project was halted, maybe there was some irregularity in the purchase. Maybe he could challenge the sale in court. "Mrs. Martha, do you have the papers for the sale?" "I don't have anything official, but I know that Sarah was very shaken by the amount she received. She said it was much less than the property was worth, but the lawyer who was helping her said there was no other way." "What lawyer?" "A certain Arthur Blackwood, Esco. He showed up here right after you were arrested, offering to help Sarah with the legal problems." David felt a chill in his stomach. He knew that name. During his time in prison, other inmates talked about corrupt lawyers who took advantage of families in vulnerable situations. "Is this Arthur Blackwood still practicing in the area?" "As far as I know, he disappeared from the city about 5 years ago. They say he left a lot of people in the lurch and left without any explanation." With each new piece of information, David felt he had been the victim of a big scheme. First, he was unjustly imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. Then his family was swindled by a corrupt lawyer who sold his property for a fraction of its real value. That night, David slept on the floor of the small cabin where Martha lived. The lady insisted on sharing the little she had, offering a simple meal and a clean blanket. It wasn't much, but after 16 years sleeping in a prison cell, that cabin felt like a palace. The next morning, David woke up determined. He would bathe in the river that ran through the property, put on the only civilian clothes he owned, and go to the city to seek answers. The nearest city was 15 kilometers away. David walked for almost 3 hours until he reached the urban center that had changed drastically during his absence. New buildings, paved streets where there used to be dirt roads, businesses he didn't recognize. His first stop was the county recorder's office. The clerk who assisted him, a middle-aged woman named Beverly, looked at him with some suspicion when he explained his situation. "You said you were in prison for 16 years. "That's right, and now I've discovered my property was sold irregularly." Beverly typed some data into the computer, and her expression changed. "Indeed, there's a transaction here from 2010, a 50-hectare rural property sold by Sarah Miller to Sterling Properties and Development, LLC. "For how much?" The clerk hesitated before answering. $80,000. David almost fell out of his chair. He knew his property was worth at least 10 times that, even back then. That's robbery! My property was worth at least $800,000. Sir, I can't comment on values. I can only inform you of what's in the official records. Can I get a copy of those documents? Yes, you can, but you'll need to pay the recorder's fees. David checked his pockets. He only had $20 that Martha had given him for city expenses. How much is it? It will be $50 for the complete certificate. Discouraged, David left the recorder's office without the documents. But an idea came to his mind. He would look for the city's public defender's office. As a former prisoner with no resources, he would be entitled to free legal assistance. The public defender's office building was small and had a huge line of people waiting for service. David waited almost 4 hours until he was called by the public defender, Attorney Jennifer Sinclair, a young woman of about 30. Mr. Miller, I've quickly read your case here. What crime were you imprisoned for? For document forgery and fraud. But I'm innocent, ma'am. I was framed by my own business partner, who forged my signature on fraudulent contracts. And were you able to prove your innocence? I wasn't. My defense lawyer barely showed up to hearings, didn't investigate anything. I ended up being convicted and serving the full sentence. Attorney Jennifer took some notes while David told his story. And now you've discovered that your property was sold for well below market value. Exactly. And from what I've been told, the lawyer who advised my wife on the sale disappeared from town years later, leaving several clients in a bad spot. Interesting. I'll request a certified copy of that transaction to analyze the documents. If there really was any irregularity, we can challenge the sale in court. For the first time in a long while, David felt a spark of hope. Perhaps there was a chance to recover at least part of what he had lost. Attorney Jennifer scheduled a new meeting for the following week and said that by then she would try to get more information about the transaction and about the whereabouts of Arthur Blackwood, Esq. Leaving the public defender's office, David decided to look for information about the current owner of his old land. Sterling Properties and Development, LLC, had an office downtown, a modern commercial building that contrasted with the traditional architecture of the place. The office secretary, a very well-groomed young blonde woman, received him coldly when he identified himself as the former owner of the farm. Mr. Sterling isn't in, but I can take a message. I'd like to speak with him personally about the property he bought from my family. Sir, that transaction happened over a decade ago. Mr. Sterling is a very busy man and doesn't have time to revisit old business. David realized it wouldn't be easy to get a conversation with the businessman. He decided to leave his name and said he would return the next day. Walking through the town streets, David noticed he was the object of curious looks and some whispers. In a small town, news travels fast, and they certainly already knew the ex-con had returned. He stopped at a small diner for a coffee and heard fragments of conversations about him. Was locked up 16 years. They say he stole a lot of money. Now wants back the property his wife sold. David felt the weight of prejudice and small-town gossip. He knew rebuilding his reputation would be as hard as rebuilding his material life. On the way back to the property, a white pickup truck pulled up beside him. The driver, a man of about 50 in expensive clothes, rolled down the window. "You're David Miller, aren't you?" "Yes, I am. Who wants to know?" "My name is William Sterling. I heard you were at my office today." David felt his heart race. It was the first time he was face to face with the man who bought his property for a fraction of its value. "Mr. Sterling, I need to talk to you about the farm you bought from my family." "Get in the truck. Let's talk with more privacy." David hesitated for a moment, but decided to accept. William drove to a gas station on the outskirts of town and parked away from the pumps. "Look, David, I'll be direct with you. I know you're questioning the sale of your property, but I want you to know everything was done legally." "Legally? You paid $80,000 for a property worth at least $800,000. I paid the price your wife asked for. She was desperate to sell, with debts piling up. It was a good deal for me, I admit, but legal. And why did you never build the planned subdivision? William was silent for a few seconds, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Environmental issues, bureaucracy, market changes. You know how these projects are. I know your construction projects were halted by the environmental agencies. Who told you that? I have my sources. William turned to look David directly in the eye. Listen here, pal. You were locked up for 16 years. Your wife sold the property legally and I bought it in good faith. Now you want to come back and stir up a transaction that happened over a decade ago? I just want justice. Justice? You were convicted of fraud and forgery. What moral standing do you have to talk about justice? The provocation hit David squarely. He felt the anger rise, but controlled himself. I was the victim of a setup, Mr. Sterling, and my family was also the victim of a dishonest deal. Then prove it in court. But I'll give you some friendly advice. Don't mess with things you don't understand. That property is mine now, and I have the means to defend what's mine. The threat was clear. William started the car and left David at the gas station. As he walked back to the property, David reflected on the conversation. The businessman had clearly been bothered by his questions, especially about the environmental issues. Upon arriving at the property, he found Mrs. Martha preparing dinner in her small cabin. How was it in the city, my son? I discovered some interesting things, Mrs. Martha, and I met that William Sterling in person. And how was it? He didn't like my questions one bit. I think there's something wrong with this whole story. David told the lady about his visit to the county recorder's office, the service at the public defender's office, and the meeting with William Sterling. That man scares me, David. Ever since he bought these lands, he's been putting pressure on other owners in the area to sell cheap. How so? He shows up with stories about how he's going to develop the region, that those who don't sell now will regret it later. Some neighbors sold, others resisted. And who resisted? Mr. Thomas, who has the property north of yours, refused the offer. Not long after, strange problems started appearing on his farm. Cattle getting sick, fences being cut, equipment disappearing. David realized he was dealing with someone more dangerous than he imagined. Do you think he's sabotaging those who won't sell? I can't prove anything, but there are too many coincidences. That night, David could barely sleep. He knew he had stirred up something he shouldn't have, but he couldn't give up. His property had been stolen, his family destroyed, and he wouldn't stop until he discovered the whole truth. The next morning, he decided to look for Mr. Thomas that Martha had mentioned. The property was about 2 kilometers to the north, and David walked along a trail he'd known since childhood. He found Thomas Brooks fixing a fence near the road. He was a man of about 60, who looked like he'd spent his life working the land. Mr. Thomas, my name is David Miller. I used to own the property south of yours. The man looked him up and down before answering. Ah, you're David. I heard you'd gotten out of prison. That's true. And I heard that Mr. William Sterling tried to buy your property too. Thomas dropped the tool and wiped the sweat from his brow. Tried and keeps trying, with lower and lower offers each time, saying the area will lose value if I don't accept soon. And the problems that started appearing on your farm. Ah, you heard about that? Yeah, very strange things. I lost 12 head of cattle last year. The vet said it was poisoning, but we never found the source. Do you suspect anyone? Thomas looked around before answering, as if afraid of being overheard. I can't prove anything, but ever since I refused Sterling's offer, my life has been hell. They've cut my fence 3 times, my tools have gone missing, and there are always strange cars passing on the road in the middle of the night. Why didn't you seek help from the police? I did, but it's my word against his. Anne Sterling has a lot of money, a lot of connections in the city. David felt he had found an ally in his fight against the corrupt businessman. Mr. Thomas, I believe my property was sold illegally. I'm working with a public defender to investigate the transaction. If you can prove anything, you can count on me as a witness. This William is destroying our area. The 2 men talked for another hour, sharing information about the businessman's questionable tactics. Thomas revealed there were at least 3 other property owners who were also being pressured to sell. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The following week, David returned to the public defender's office for his scheduled meeting with attorney Jennifer. The lawyer had obtained some important information. "David, I analyzed the sale documentation and found some irregularities. First, the price is indeed well below market value. Second, there are some signatures that look different from the samples I got from your wife." "What do you mean, different?" "I got some old signatures of Sarah's from the county recorder's office, from when she married you. Comparing them to the signatures on the deed of sale, there are significant differences in the handwriting." David's heart raced. Could it be that the signatures were forged? Does that mean the sale was fraudulent? It could be, but we'll need a handwriting expert analysis to confirm, and that costs money you don't have. Isn't there another way? I have an idea. I'll request a preliminary injunction to suspend any activity on the property until the origin of the transaction is clarified. If we can prove irregularities, we can challenge the entire sale. David left the public defender's office with more hope than he had felt since returning from prison. Perhaps there really was a chance to recover his property. But his hopes were soon shaken. On the way back, he stopped at the same diner for a coffee and overheard a worrying conversation between two men at the counter. "William is ordering the clearing of that land by the road. Will he start the construction, even with the injunction? He said there's a way around everything. You just need to know who to talk to." David discreetly moved closer to hear better. "I heard he's already made a deal with someone at City Hall to get the construction approved, a matter of days. If William was really about to start construction, the entire landscape of the property would change irreversibly." David needed to act fast. He ran back to the public defender's office. But attorney Jennifer had already left for a hearing. He left an urgent message at the front desk and returned to the property. Martha greeted him with a worried expression. "David, some men came here this morning. They said they were surveyors. They were measuring and marking the land." "What did these men look like?" "Two young guys with surveying equipment. They didn't want to talk to me, said they had authorization from the owner." David walked around the property and noticed several wooden stakes driven into the ground, with colored plastic tape. It was a sign the project was being resumed. That night, David could barely sleep again. He felt he was in a race against time. If he couldn't quickly prove the irregularities in the sale, he would forever lose any chance of recovering his land. The next morning, he woke to the sound of engines. He left the cabin and saw a backhoe and two trucks parked at the entrance to the property. Several workers were getting out of the vehicles and starting to unload tools. "Stop!" shouted David, running toward the workers. "You can't work here." The foreman, a strong man about 40 years old, approached. "Who are you, man?" "I am the original owner of this land. There's an injunction being requested to halt all activity here. All I know is I have orders to start work today. If there's a problem, take it up with the office." "What kind of work are you going to do?" "Clearing the land and grading. We're going to tear down these old structures to prepare the soil." David felt panic. If they tore down the house, it would eliminate any possibility of investigating the property's history. "You can't tear down this house. It has historical value." The foreman laughed at the statement. "Historical value. It's just a shack falling apart. Our job is to clear all this out." David ran to the cabin where Martha lived. "Mrs. Martha, they're going to tear everything down. I need to go to the city urgently to speak with the public defender." The elderly woman, despite her advanced age, showed determination. "Go on, my boy. I'll stay here and keep an eye on them. If they try to tear anything down, I'll plant myself in front of the machine." David ran the 15 kilometers to the city like he had never run in his life. He arrived at the public defender's office out of breath and sweaty, demanding to speak urgently with attorney Jennifer Sinclair. "Attorney, they're at the property right now. They're going to tear everything down." "Calm down, David. I got the injunction yesterday afternoon, but it hasn't been served yet. Let's go right now." Attorney Jennifer and David returned to the property in the public defender's official car, accompanied by a process server. When they arrived, they found Martha literally sitting in front of the backhoe, preventing it from moving. "Get out of there, old woman," shouted the foreman. "You're going to get hurt." "I'm not moving. You're not tearing down this house while I'm alive." The scene was both comical and moving. a 70-year-old woman facing a heavy machine to defend her friend's property. The process server identified himself and handed the injunction to the work foreman. By court order, all activities on this property are suspended until further notice. The foreman read the document with a sour look. I'll have to call the boss. This is going to cause problems. As the workers disassembled the equipment and prepared to leave, Attorney Jennifer explained the next steps to David. We've bought some time. Now we'll work to prove the irregularities in the sale. I need you to try and find your ex-wife. Find Sarah. Yes, if you can get her testimony confirming she was pressured to sell for a low price, or if she admits she didn't sign some documents, we'll have a very strong case. David felt a chill in his stomach. Looking for Sarah meant confronting not only the past, but also discovering what life she had built away from him. I know she went to a coastal city, to her sister's house, but that was 14 years ago. I'll give you a letter of introduction from the Public Defender's Office. If you can locate her, it will be easier to convince her to cooperate with the investigation. That night, David talked at length with Martha about the possibility of looking for his ex-wife. My boy, you have to be prepared for what you might find. 14 years is a long time. She may have remarried, started another family. I know, Mrs. Martha, but I have to try. Not just because of the property, but because I have 2 children who grew up without knowing me. How are you going to find them? The letter that Sarah left mentions her sister Victoria, who lived in a coastal city. I'll look in phone records, social media, anything that gives me a clue. The next morning, David went to an internet cafe in the city. He hadn't used a computer in decades and had trouble navigating the internet. With the attendant's help, he managed to search for information about Victoria Vance, Sarah's maiden name. After 2 hours of searching, he found a social media profile of a woman named Victoria Vance, who lived in a coastal city 200 kilometers away. The photos showed a woman approximately 50 years old, with features similar to Sarah's. More importantly, in one of the photos appeared a younger woman that David recognized immediately. It was Sarah, more mature, but still beautiful as he remembered. David's heart beat erratically. His ex-wife was there, 200 kilometers away, with a life he knew nothing about. He wrote down the address he managed to discover and returned to the property to tell the news to Martha. I found her, Mrs. Martha. Sarah is living in a coastal city with her sister. And what are you going to do? I'm going there. I need to talk to her in person. My son, think carefully about what you're going to do. Maybe it's better to call first to prepare the ground. No, if I call, she might refuse to see me. I need to be face to face with her. David used the little money he had to buy a bus ticket. The trip to the coastal city would take 5 hours, and he would use that time to think about what he would say to the woman who was once the love of his life. During the trip, David imagined hundreds of scenarios. How would Sarah react upon seeing him? Did she still hold any feelings for him? And the children, Jason and Rachel, how would they react to meeting the father who left their lives when they were little? The coastal city was a contrast to the rural area David came from. Tall buildings, constant movement, the beach in the background. The address he got led to a middle-class residential neighborhood with well-kept houses and tree-lined streets. David found the house and stood across the street for almost an hour, trying to gather the courage to knock on the door. It was a simple but cozy building with a small garden in front. Finally, he crossed the street and rang the bell. A woman approximately 50 years old answered. It was Victoria, whom David recognized from the online photos. Good afternoon. Are you Victoria Vance? Yes, I am. Who are you? My name is David Miller. Was married to your sister Sarah. Victoria's face completely changed expression, a mix of surprise, fear, and distrust. David, what are you doing here? I got out of prison a few weeks ago and I really need to talk to Sarah. It's about the property she sold. Sarah isn't here. When does she return? Victoria hesitated before answering. She doesn't live here anymore. She moved 2 years ago. David felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He had traveled 200 kilometers based on old information. Where did she move to? I can't tell you that. Please, Victoria, I didn't come here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to her about some documents. David, you don't understand. Sarah has rebuilt her life. She got married again. The information hit David like a punch to the stomach. Rationally, he knew it was a possibility, but hearing confirmation still hurt. And the kids? Jason and Rachel? They're adults now. Jason is 24, Rachel is 22. Where are they? Jason still lives with his mother. Rachel is in college in another city. David leaned on the house's gate, feeling his legs go weak. Victoria, please. I know you owe me nothing, but I really need to find Sarah. I discovered the sale of our property may have been fraudulent. Fraudulent how? It seems the signatures on the documents may have been forged. If true, she was the victim of a scam. Victoria was silent for a few seconds, clearly torn between distrust and concern for her sister. Come in. Let's talk better. The living room of the house was simple but cozy. On the walls, several family photos, including some of Jason and Rachel as adults. David observed them with emotion. His children had grown into handsome, seemingly successful young adults. Victoria, I know I have no right to ask for any favors, but if Sarah was deceived in that sale, she needs to know. Tell me what you found out. David explained about the Public Defender's Office investigation, the possible signature forgeries, and William Sterling's questionable tactics. My sister suffered a lot back then, David. She tried to hold things together alone, but the debts were many and the pressure was great. What kind of pressure? Besides the debts, there were people going to her house demanding payment, making threats. She became afraid for the boys. What kind of threats? They said if she didn't pay quickly, bad things could happen to the children. That's when that lawyer showed up offering help. David felt anger growing inside him. His family had been terrorized while he was in prison, and he couldn't do anything to protect them. That lawyer, Arthur Blackwood, Esques? The same. He said he knew buyers willing to pay in cash, that it was the only way to settle everything quickly. And she trusted him. She was desperate, David. Without you, without money, with 2 small children and people making threats. What could she do? David began to understand that his ex-wife had also been a victim in the whole story. She wasn't the villain he had imagined all these years. Victoria, where is Sarah now? I need to talk to her. Victoria went to a desk in the corner of the room and returned with a piece of paper. I'll give you her address, but promise me you won't cause trouble in her life. I promise. I just want to clarify this matter about the documents. David copied the address onto a paper. Sarah lived in a town 100 kilometers away, also on the Florida coast. One last thing, Victoria, how are my children? Do they know the truth about what happened to me? Sarah was always very careful about what she told them. She said you had made a mistake, but that you were a good father. She never spoke badly of you to them. This information brought a little relief to David. At least his children hadn't grown up hating him. Do they ask about me? Jason sometimes asks. He's curious about you, about life in the countryside. Rachel is more reserved, doesn't talk much about it. David said goodbye to Victoria and caught another bus to the town where Sarah lived. During the trip, he reflected on everything he had discovered. His anger toward his ex-wife was fading, replaced by understanding and even compassion. The new town was smaller than the previous one, with the feel of a vacation town. The address led David to a residential neighborhood near the beach with middle-class houses. It was almost 6 in the evening when David arrived at the street where Sarah lived. The house was single-story, well-kept, with a small but tidy garden. An economy car was parked out front. David took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached from inside, and his breath caught when the door opened. It was her, Sarah. Older, with a few grey strands in her brown hair, but still the woman he fell in love with 25 years ago. Her face went through a sequence of emotions: surprise, shock, fear, and something that might have been nostalgia. David, she whispered. Hi, Sarah. The two looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, each processing the reunion in different ways. What are you doing here? How did you find me? I talked to Victoria. Sarah, I need to talk to you about the property sale. Sarah looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might see them talking. It's not a good time, David. Please. I discovered some things that might be important for you too. My husband will be here any minute. Just 5 minutes. It's about Arthur Blackwood, Esqueces, and the sale of the farm. The mention of the attorney's name changed Sarah's expression. What do you know about him? I know he disappeared from town years after advising you on the sale, and I know he possibly forged your signature on some documents. Sarah turned pale. Come in quickly, but just for a few minutes. The living room of the house was cozy, with family photos on the walls. David noticed photos of Jason and Rachel, now adults, and also of a middle-aged man who must have been Sarah's new husband. Sarah, I need to ask you something very important. Do you remember signing all the documents for the property sale? Of course I remember. It was the hardest moment of my life. Are you sure you signed everything? Because the public defender who's helping me found some inconsistencies in the signatures. Sarah was silent for a few seconds, as if trying to remember something. You know, there was a day when Mr. Blackwood said I wouldn't need to go to the county recorder's office because he could sign some things for me with a power of attorney. David's heart raced. What kind of things? I don't remember exactly. He said they were formalities, papers I had already authorized. I was so tired of going back and forth to the county recorder's office. Sarah, this could be the proof we need. If he signed documents pretending to be you, the sale is void. But David, even if that's true, what will it change? It's been 14 years. It could change everything. I could recover the property, or at least a part of it, and you might be entitled to compensation for the difference between the real value and what you received. Sarah stood up and walked to the window looking at the street. David, I've rebuilt my life. I have a husband who loves me, a stable life. I don't want to stir up these things from the past. But you were wronged, Sarah. They stole from you, from me, from our children. Our children grew up fine without that property. They're studying, working, they're good people. I know, and I'm proud of them, even though I wasn't part of raising them. But that doesn't change the fact that we were victims of a crime. A car stopped in front of the house. Sarah tensed up. That's my husband. You need to go. Sarah, at least think about what I told you. If you change your mind, I'm staying at an inn nearby. David wrote the name of the inn on a piece of paper and handed it to Sarah. She walked him to the door, clearly nervous about her husband's arrival. David, she said before he left, I'm sorry for everything that happened. For the sale, for leaving. You did what you thought was best at the time, Sarah. I understand. A man of about 50, well-dressed and with a successful appearance, was approaching the house. David left quickly to avoid a confrontation. At the inn, David spent a sleepless night, thinking about the reunion with Sarah. It was clear she still had feelings for him, but also that she had built a new life she didn't want disturbed. The next morning, David was having coffee at the inn when a young man approached his table. Tall, dark-haired, with features David recognized immediately. Are you David Miller? David's heart almost stopped. It was Jason, his son, now a 24-year-old man. Jason. It's me. Mom told me you were in town. I wanted to talk. David stood up, unsure what to do. Hug his son. Shake his hand. 16 years of absence had created a barrier neither knew how to cross. Sit here, son. Want some coffee? Yes, I do. The two men sat down, observing each other. Jason looked like a younger David, but with some of Sarah's features. Dad. Can I call you Dad? Of course, Jason. You've always been my son, even with me being far away. Mom always spoke highly of you. Said you were a hard-working, honest man, just down on your luck. David felt his eyes well up. Sarah had protected his image in front of the children, even though she had reasons to be resentful. And you, Jason, how is your life? I work at a mechanic's shop here in town. I've always liked tinkering with machines, and I study engineering at night. Engineering? That makes me proud. I always dreamed my children would get an education. Dad, I'm curious about something. What was our property like? Mom talked about it a lot, but I was little when we left. David spent the next hour describing to Jason what the farm was like, the animals they raised, the happy moments they lived there as a family. The young man listened with genuine interest. Must be a good life in the country. Sometimes I get tired of the city, the noise, the pollution. It's a hard life, but rewarding. There's a freedom you don't find in the city. Dad, Mom told me about the story of the forged documents. Is it true? It might be. I'm investigating it with a public defender. If it's confirmed, maybe I can recover at least part of the property. Jason was silent for a few seconds. And if you do, would you go back to live there? It's my dream, son. But now everything's changed. You're adults. You have your own lives. I don't want to disrupt anything. Maybe I could visit you there, see the land where I was born? The question moved David deeply. His eldest son was showing a genuine interest in his roots. It would be the greatest joy of my life, Jason. And Rachel? Don't you want to meet her too? Of course I do, but I know she's studying in another city. She's coming home this weekend. If you want, I can talk to her. David spent the rest of the day talking with Jason. The young man told him about his dreams, his plans for the future, and showed a strong, determined personality that reminded David very much of his own younger self. In the late afternoon, Jason said goodbye, promising he would talk to Rachel and try to convince her to meet her father. David returned to the inn moved but also worried. He knew his presence was causing turbulence in his ex-family's life, but he couldn't just give up now. The next morning, David received a call on the inn's phone. It was Sarah. "David, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at the beach near the pier at 2 in the afternoon?" "Of course, Sarah." At 2 o'clock sharp, David found Sarah sitting on a bench facing the sea. She was more serious than the day before, like someone who had made a difficult decision. "Sarah, thank you for agreeing to talk to me." "David, I thought all night about what you told me yesterday, about the forged documents. And I remembered a few more things about that time, things that didn't seem important at the moment, but that makes sense now." David sat beside her on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "What kind of things?" "Arthur Blackwood Esquiers always pressured me to sign the papers quickly, said that if I took too long, the buyers might back out or lower their offer." "Go on." "And there was one day he showed up with a bunch of papers already filled out. Said they were copies of documents I'd already signed, that he needed more copies for the county recorder's office." "And you signed without reading them?" "I was so tired, David. With the little kids, the bills due, people pressuring me, I trusted him." "Sarah, what you're telling me could be the key to everything." Sarah turned to look at him directly. "If I testify about this, if I confirm I was deceived, what will happen? We can challenge the sale in court. You might be entitled to compensation for the difference between the property's real value and what you received. And you? If the sale is declared void, I can recover the property, or at least a part of it." Sarah fell silent, watching the ocean waves. "David, there's something I need to tell you about why I sold the property." "What?" "It wasn't just because of the debts. I couldn't stay there anymore. Everything reminded me of you. The house, the furniture, the smell of the earth. It was too painful." David felt a tightness in his chest. "Sarah, I loved you so much, David. When you were arrested, a part of me died with it. Selling the property was a way to try to forget, to start over." "And did it work?" "For a while, yes. I met Stephen, my current husband. He's a good man. He made me happy in a different way. But I never managed to forget you completely." The two were silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own memories and feelings. "Sarah, I didn't come here to destroy your current life. I only came to seek justice for what they did to us. I know, and that's why I decided to help you." David turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I will testify about what I remember of the sale. I will confirm that I was pressured and that I likely signed documents without reading them properly." "Sarah, are you sure? This could complicate your current life." "Stephen is an understanding man. I've already spoken to him about our past. He knows you were my first love and that our story ended traumatically. And he accepts you helping me. He understands it's a matter of justice. And also, he knows of cases where people were deceived by corrupt lawyers. It happens more than we think. David felt a wave of gratitude and hope. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. It's the least I can do after everything you lost. And the kids. Jason already knows everything. In fact, he was the one who convinced me to help you. He said if we were victims of a crime, we have to fight for justice. And Rachel? She's coming home tomorrow. Jason will talk to her." That afternoon, David and Sarah walked along the beach, talking about the past and planning the next steps of the investigation. It was strange, but also comforting, to be next to the woman who had shared the best years of his life once again. The next morning, Jason showed up at the inn, accompanied by a young woman David recognized immediately, despite not having seen her for 16 years. Rachel had become a beautiful woman, with delicate features that strongly reminded him of Sarah in her youth. "Dad, this is Rachel." Rachel approached timidly. Unlike her brother, she seemed more reserved and cautious. "Hi, Dad." David was moved to hear the word Dad coming from his daughter's mouth. "Rachel, you've grown up and become a beautiful woman, just like your mother." "Thank you. Dad, Jason told me about the property story. Is it true that you were deceived?" "It seems so, honey. Your mother was tricked by a corrupt lawyer." Rachel and Jason sat with David at the inn, and he told the whole story. The unjust arrest, the return home, the discovery that everything had been sold, and the evidence that the sale was fraudulent. "Dad, if you get the property back, what will you do?" asked Rachel. "I'll try to rebuild it, honey. It's the only home I know." "And can we visit you there?" Rachel's question surprised David. He expected more resistance from his daughter. "Of course, honey. It would be a dream come true to have you at the property again." "Dad, I'm studying veterinary medicine," said Rachel. "I've always been interested in animals, rural life. Maybe I could help you with the cattle when I visit." David could barely contain his emotion. His children not only accepted him back into their lives, but also showed interest in the lifestyle he loved so much. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. After 3 days in Miami, David returned to the property accompanied by Sarah. She had decided to return in person to give a statement at the public defender's office and revisit the place where she had lived the happiest years of her life. The bus ride was quiet at first. 16 years of separation had created a distance that wouldn't be easily overcome. But gradually, they began to talk about their children, about the changes that had occurred in the area, about plans for the future. When they arrived at the property, Sarah was shocked by the state of neglect. The house she had left standing, though already in need of repairs, was now almost in ruins. "My God, David, what have they done to our house?" William Sterling bought several properties and left everything to rot, until he could get the permits to build the condominium. Martha received Sarah with affection, but also with a certain reserve. After all, in the lady's view, Sarah had abandoned David when he needed her most. "Mrs. Martha, I know you must judge me for selling the property." "It's not my place to judge anyone, dear. Everyone did what they thought was best in their situation. I came here to help David prove we were deceived in the sale." Martha smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. "Then you are welcome. This man has suffered a lot. He deserves to get back what is rightfully his." The next morning, David and Sarah went to the public defender's office in the city. Attorney Jennifer Sinclair received the couple with interest and professionalism. "Mrs. Sarah, thank you very much for agreeing to cooperate with the investigation. I need you to tell me in detail how the property sale process went." Sarah spent 2 hours recounting every detail she could remember. The pressure from creditors, the appearance of Arthur Blackwood, Esker offering help, the rush to sign the documents, the papers she signed without reading completely. "Mrs. Sarah, are you certain you signed documents without reading them?" "I'm certain. He said they were just copies of papers I had already signed, formalities for the county recorder's office." "And regarding the sale price, $80,000, did you think it was fair?" "At the time, Mr. Blackwood said it was the most he could get, considering I needed to sell quickly and that there were many outstanding debts." Attorney Jennifer Sinclair took detailed notes of the entire statement. Based on what you've told me, I'm going to request a forensic document examination of the sale documents. If forgery of the signatures is proven, we'll have a solid case to annul the transaction. How long could that take? Asked David. The examination could take 2 to 3 months, but I'll request an expedited process, considering there are attempts to alter the land. Upon leaving the public defender's office, David and Sarah walked through the city that had changed so much since the time they lived there as a couple. Sarah, thank you for doing this. I know it's not easy for you. David, I was a victim in this story too. If I was truly deceived, I have as much right as you to seek justice. And how is your marriage? Stephen isn't bothered by you helping me. Sarah hesitated before answering. Stephen is an understanding man, but I admit our conversation about you brought up some issues that were somewhat dormant. What kind of issues? About feelings from the past, about the fact that I never completely got over our separation. David stopped walking and looked directly at Sarah. Sarah, I don't want to be responsible for problems in your current marriage. You're not responsible, David. The problems already existed. Your return just brought them to the surface. They continued walking until they reached a square where they used to date when they were young. The place had been renovated, but still maintained the same romantic essence from decades ago. Remember when we used to come here on Sundays? Asked Sarah. I remember. You always brought those sandwiches your mother made, and we'd sit and plan our future. We were so naive. We thought love was enough to overcome any difficulty. Maybe it was if circumstances had been different. Sarah sat on a bench in the square, and David sat beside her. David, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. What? When you were arrested, I wanted to believe in your innocence. But as time passed, with people talking, the evidence that seemed to incriminate you, I began to doubt. David felt as if he'd been slapped in the face. You thought I was guilty? For a while, yes, and it consumed me with guilt. How could I doubt the man I loved? How could I suspect the father of my children? Sarah, that's why I sold the property and left the area. I couldn't look at that house anymore without remembering my own betrayal of you. David was silent for a few minutes, processing the revelation. And now? Do you still think I'm guilty? No. Talking to you, seeing how you're fighting for justice, I realize the man I knew still exists. You're not capable of the crimes you were convicted of. Thank you for telling me that, Sarah. I know it wasn't easy. David, there's one more thing about Stephen. What about him? He knows I still have feelings for you, and because of that, he decided maybe it's best if we take a break. David was alarmed by the revelation. Sarah, you can't destroy your marriage because of me. It's not because of you, it's because of my own confusion. I need to sort out my feelings before I can be fair to either of you. On the way back to the property, Sarah seemed more at peace, as if confessing her feelings had lifted a weight from her shoulders. Mrs. Martha welcomed them both with a simple but tasty dinner. During the meal, Sarah told them about the years she had been away, raising Jason and Rachel alone, facing financial difficulties, meeting Stephen. And you two, how did you meet? Asked David. He was a client at the salon where I worked, a widowed man with no children who fell in love with me and the kids. He was very kind, gave us stability when we needed it most. He must be a good man. He is. That's why I feel so confused now. It's not fair to him for me to be torn between two people. Mrs. Martha, who had been listening in silence until then, decided to speak. My dear, the heart doesn't understand fairness. It understands truth. And you need to discover what your truth is. That night, Sarah slept in the small cabin with Mrs. Martha, while David set up an improvised tent near the ruins of the main house. For the first time in 16 years, they were sleeping in the same place, though in separate spaces. The next morning, David woke to the sound of excited voices. Jason and Rachel had arrived unexpectedly, bringing tools and building materials. Dad, we decided to come help you start rebuilding the house, said Jason. Even though the court still hasn't decided about the property, asked David. Even so, said Rachel. If it goes wrong, at least you'll have had a few days of happiness here with us. The arrival of the children brought a new energy to the place. Jason, with his mechanical knowledge, began assessing what could be repaired. Rachel, with her future veterinarian's eye, examined the artesian well and the pastures. "Dad, this land has potential for raising quality cattle," said Rachel. "The soil is good, there's water, and the location is good for getting the product to market. Do you really think it could work?" "I'm sure. With proper planning and initial investment, we could rebuild a profitable herd." Sarah watched her children working with David and felt a mix of joy and melancholy. These were scenes she had dreamed of for years. The family reunited, working together on the property. During lunch, prepared by Martha with Rachel's help, the family talked about plans for the property. "Dad, if you can recover the land, what about forming a partnership?" suggested Jason. "I'd handle the mechanical side, the equipment. Rachel would help with the animals, you with the overall management." "And me?" asked Sarah. "Where would I fit in this family partnership?" The children looked at their mother, realizing she was somewhat lost between two lives. "Mum, you've always been good at management," said Rachel. "Remember how you used to organize the farm's finances?" "That was a long time ago, dear." "Knowledge doesn't fade," said David. "And you know this property as well as I do." The afternoon was spent with everyone working together. Jason and David began repairing the roof of the main house, while Rachel and Sarah cleaned what was left of the kitchen. Martha coordinated everything with the wisdom of her 70 years. For the first time in 16 years, David felt truly at home, not just because of the property, but because of the presence of his reunited family. At the end of the day, as Jason and Rachel prepared to return to Miami, Jason called his father aside for a private talk. "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Of course, son." "Mom is confused between you and Stephen, but Rachel and I think she never got over you." "Jason, I don't want to destroy her marriage." "It's not destroying, Dad. It's letting her choose. And to choose, she needs to know what the option is." "What do you mean? Do you still love her?" The question took David by surprise. He had spent 16 years trying not to think about Sarah, not to feed impossible hopes. "Son, I've always loved your mother, even in prison, even when I found out she had sold everything and left. The love never died." "Then tell her that." "Jason, it's not that simple." "Dad, you've already lost 16 years. Don't lose the rest of your life out of pride or fear." The next morning, Jason and Rachel returned to the city, leaving David and Sarah alone on the property with Martha. The day felt strange for both of them. They had so much to talk about, so many feelings to resolve, but neither knew how to begin. It was Martha who created the opportunity. In the late afternoon, she announced she was going to visit a cousin in town and wouldn't be back until the next day. "You two need to talk without the presence of a curious old woman," she said, picking up her small travel bag. After Martha's departure, David and Sarah were alone for the first time in 16 years. "Want to walk around the property?" asked David. "I'll show you what's changed and what stayed the same." They walked through the fields, now overgrown with weeds but still recognizable. Sarah pointed out where the flower beds she used to tend were. David indicated where he planned to rebuild the corral. "You know what I miss the most?" said Sarah. "What?" "The silence. In the city, there's always noise from cars, neighbors, activity. Here you can hear your own thoughts." "That's true. In prison, silence was rare too. There was always the sound of bars, voices, commotion." They sat on a large rock in the middle of the property, which offered a panoramic view of the entire land. "Sarah, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "Are you happy with Stephen?" Sarah took a while to answer. "I am comfortable with him. It's different from what I felt for you, but it's a good life." "Comfortable?" "David, when you went to prison, a part of me died. I thought I'd never be able to love with the same intensity again. Stephen gave me affection, stability, companionship. It's a mature, peaceful love. And is that what you want? Peaceful love? I don't know anymore. Seeing you again, being here, I feel that part of me that was asleep is waking up." David turned to look at her directly. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I never stopped loving you. All those years in prison, You were my strength to keep going. You were the hope of one day coming back and rebuilding our family. David, I know you have a life with another man. I know I can't just show up and ask to go back to how we were, but I need you to know, if you decide to give me a second chance, I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy. Sarah fell silent, her eyes glistening. David, I never completely stopped loving you either. A part of my heart was always yours. And now? Now I'm confused. It's 16 years of separation, 2 different lives. How do we rebuild something like that? Slowly, one day at a time. They sat there until the sun set, talking about the past, the present, and the possibilities of the future. That night they slept apart, but for the first time in a long time they both slept in peace. The next morning, a pickup truck stopped at the entrance to the property. William Sterling got out of the vehicle with an unfriendly look, accompanied by 2 men who looked like security guards. "So you're having a picnic on my property," he said, approaching. "Mr. Sterling, the property is under a court order suspending any activity," replied David. "A court order that's worthless. My lawyers have already challenged it. Soon I'll be able to proceed with the project normally." Sarah approached, and William looked at her with interest. "You must be the ex-wife who sold this land, right?" "I'm Sarah. And from what I've discovered, I was deceived in that sale." William laughed mockingly. "Deceived? You got exactly what you asked for at the time. It's not my fault if you didn't know how to negotiate. The price was way below market value, and it seems some documents were forged. Prove it. Until then, I'll remain the legitimate owner." One of the men with William moved toward David in an intimidating manner. "Boss, you want us to have a little private chat with them?" David stepped in front of Sarah, protective. "That won't be necessary, Shorty," said William. "They've already gotten the message." "What message?" asked David. "The message that you shouldn't mess with things you don't understand. This property is mine, and I'll defend what's mine." After William and his goons left, David and Sarah were worried. It was clear the businessman wouldn't hesitate to use intimidating methods. "David, I think we'd better go to the city. Staying here could be dangerous." "I'm not leaving my land, Sarah. I've already lost too much time. If he wants to intimidate, he'll have to face me." "What if he comes back with more people? If he does something to us? We report him to the police." "David, be realistic. He has money, connections. His word carries more weight than ours." David knew Sarah was right, but his pride wouldn't allow him to yield to threats. Martha returned from the city in the late afternoon and was worried when she heard about William's visit. "My children, that man is dangerous. You shouldn't provoke him." "Mrs. Martha, we're not provoking anyone. We're just fighting for our rights. Rights are worthless if we're not alive to enjoy them." The night was tense. David barely slept, always alert to any strange noise. Sarah was also restless in Martha's cabin. Early in the morning, they were awakened by the sound of engines. Several heavy machines were entering the property: tractors, excavators, trucks. David ran outside and saw dozens of workers spreading across the property, beginning to mark areas for grading. "Stop!" shouted David. "You can't work here. There's an injunction." The foreman approached with a paper in hand. "The injunction was suspended yesterday afternoon. We have authorization to work." David took the document and saw it was a court decision suspending the previous injunction. William's lawyer had obtained a favorable ruling in record time. "This can't be right. I'll call the public defender." But when he called Attorney Jennifer, he discovered the information was true. The judge had suspended the injunction based on technical arguments presented by William's lawyers. "Attorney Jennifer, what can we do?" "I'll appeal the decision, but it may take time. For now, they have the legal right to work on the property." David hung up the phone in despair. In a few hours, the machines would destroy any evidence that could help the investigation. Sarah approached him with tear-filled eyes. "David, I think we've lost. I can't give up now, Sarah. It's all I have left. But what more can we do? They have the law on their side, at least temporarily." David looked around the property, seeing the machines preparing to devastate everything that remained of his former life. Then he made a desperate decision. "Sarah, call Jason and Rachel. Tell them to come urgently." "Why?" "If they're going to destroy everything, At least I want my children to see how it was before. I want them to know every inch of this land before it becomes a condo development." Sarah made the calls, and Jason and Rachel promised to arrive by late afternoon. Meanwhile, the machines began working on the farthest parts of the property. The noise of the engines and the earth being churned echoed throughout the area. Martha, at 70 years old, proved more combative than ever. "My children, we're not going to let them win so easily. Mrs. Martha, what can we do? The law is on their side. The law of men, perhaps. But there are other laws. I'll call the people from the Residents Association, the other farmers in the area. If we all unite, maybe we can put pressure on them." Martha's idea sparked a glimmer of hope in David. She began making calls to neighbors and acquaintances, telling them about the situation. To everyone's surprise, the response was positive. Many residents of the area were also being pressured by William and his partners to sell their properties. In the late afternoon, when Jason and Rachel arrived, they found about 20 people gathered on the property, neighbors, small farmers, long-time residents of the area. "Dad, what's happening?" asked Jason. "The people from the area have united to support us. It seems we're not the only victims of Mr. William." Mr. Thomas, the neighbor who had been mentioned before, took the lead of the group. "Everyone, we can't let these speculators destroy our area. They've already bought half the land here for a pittance, using pressure and threats." A lady of about 60 approached Sarah. "My dear, my name is Mrs. Rose. I was also approached by that Arthur Blackwood Esquires years ago. He wanted me to sell my small property. And what happened? I distrusted him right away. Too sweet-talking, too much hurry. I sent him away, but I know he tricked other people." Others began reporting similar experiences. The group discovered that Arthur Blackwood Esquire had worked on at least 10 properties in the area, always using the same tactics, pressuring vulnerable owners, offering lowball prices as the only solution, rushing the signatures. "Everyone, if we combine all the cases, we could have a class action lawsuit against this lawyer and against William," said Jason. "But Arthur Blackwood Esquire disappeared," Sarah reminded them. "It doesn't matter. If we can prove he was acting in concert with William, we can hold the businessman accountable for all the fraudulent transactions." The meeting stretched late into the night. People shared information, documents, and memories about the suspicious dealings. Mr. Thomas Brooks revealed something important. "Everyone, I have a contact who works at City Hall. He told me that William has connections with some people in the municipal government. That's how he gets permits so quickly." "What kind of connections?" asked David. "It seems there's a favoritism scheme. He makes under-the-table payments to get project approvals fast." This information opened a new possibility. If they could prove corruption, they could nullify not only the fraudulent purchases, but also all the irregularly obtained permits. The next morning, the group organized to go as a delegation to the regional public prosecutor's office. They took all the documents and testimonies they had collected. The prosecutor, Attorney Eduardo Martins, received them with interest. "I will review all this material. If there is indeed evidence of a corruption scheme and document forgery, I will open an investigation immediately." "Attorney Eduardo, how long could this take?" asked David. "If the evidence is solid, I can request an injunction suspending all of Mr. Williams' company's activities in the region. That could happen as soon as this week." For the first time in weeks, David felt real hope that justice could prevail. When they returned to the property, they found the machinery idle and the workers talking in groups. The foreman seemed to be on the phone, arguing with someone. "What's going on?" asked David. "It seems they received an order to stop the work," said Martha, who had been watching. The foreman approached the group. "Folks, I'm going to have to suspend work for today. Problems with the documentation." David and the neighbors exchanged glances. Perhaps the visit to the prosecutor had already taken effect. That afternoon, Attorney Eduardo called David with good news. "Mr. David, I obtained an injunction suspending all activities of Sterling Properties and Development LLC in the region. There is sufficient evidence of irregularities to warrant a full investigation." The news spread quickly among the neighbors. For the first time in years, they had achieved a victory against the corrupt businessman. But the joy was short-lived. The next day, William appeared on the property again, this time visibly angry. "You think you've beaten me," he said, addressing David and Sarah. "This is just a setback. I have the best lawyers in New York City working on the case. Mr. William, you are being investigated for corruption and document forgery," said David. "Prove it." "Until then, I will remain a respected businessman, and you will remain an ex-convict and a woman who abandoned her family." The provocation hit both David and Sarah hard, but they stood firm. "We didn't come here to listen to insults," said Sarah. "We came seeking justice." "Justice?" William laughed mockingly. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I have contacts in every sphere. I can make your lives hell." At that moment, Jason approached. He had arrived from the city, bringing Rachel and some other young people from the area. "Mr. William, you're not just dealing with my parents. You're dealing with an entire community that has united against corruption." "Oh, now the little kids want to play lawyer too." Jason remained calm in the face of the provocation. "I'm not playing. I'm documenting every threat you're making. Rachel is recording this conversation on her phone." William looked around and realized he was surrounded by several people, some clearly filming the confrontation. "Do you think you're going to intimidate me with cameras?" "We're not intimidating anyone," said Rachel. "We're just gathering evidence for the investigation." William Sterling realized he was in an uncomfortable position. Making explicit threats in front of so many witnesses could further harm his legal situation. "This isn't over," he said, before returning to his car. After William's departure, the group celebrated the small moral victory. But David Miller knew the businessman wouldn't give up easily. In the following days, the situation remained relatively calm. The machinery stayed idle, the prosecutor's investigation progressed, and David had time to plan the future more calmly. Jason and Rachel began visiting the property regularly, helping with cleanup and the minor repairs that were possible while awaiting the court's decision. Rachel brought some equipment borrowed from the veterinary college and conducted a complete analysis of the property's soil and water. "Dad, the conditions here are excellent for livestock. With a relatively low initial investment, we could set up a very productive cattle ranch." "Honey, first I need to be sure I'll get the property back. Then we can think about investments." "Dad, Jason and I have already talked about this. If everything works out, we want to help financially with the fresh start." "How so?" "We have some savings. It's not a lot, but it would be enough to buy a few head of cattle and fix the basic facilities." David was moved by his children's proposal. Not only did they want to reconnect with him, but they were also willing to invest in a shared future. "Kids, I can't take your money. I've already lost 16 years of your lives. I won't jeopardize your future, too." "Dad, it wouldn't be jeopardizing," said Jason. "It would be an investment. We believe in this land's potential and in your ability to make it productive again." Sarah, who was following the conversation, felt emotional seeing how the children respected and trusted the father they barely knew. A week later, attorney Arthur Blackwood, Esquire, called with important news about the investigation. "Mr. Miller, we managed to locate Arthur Blackwood, Esq." "Where is he?" "He was arrested in another region for similar crimes. When he learned about the investigation here, he decided to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And what did he say?" "He confessed to working in a scheme with William Sterling. His role was to convince vulnerable property owners to sell for low prices. In many cases, he forged signatures when the owners hesitated." David could hardly believe it. Finally, they had the proof they needed. "Mr. Blackwood, does this mean I can recover the property?" "Most likely, yes. With Mr. Blackwood's confession and the evidence we've gathered, we have a solid case to annul all the fraudulent transactions." "And how long will it take?" "The preliminary decision should come next week. If it's in your favor, William Sterling will have to return the properties and pay compensation for the improvements he destroyed." David ran to share the news with Sarah, who was helping Martha in the makeshift garden they had set up. "Sarah, we have news from Mr. Blackwood." Sarah dropped her tool and ran to him. "What news?" "They found Arthur Blackwood, Esquire. He confessed to everything, said he was working in a scheme with William." Sarah threw herself into David's arms, overwhelmed. It was the first time they had embraced since reuniting, and both felt the strength of feelings that had never completely disappeared. "Does this mean we're going to succeed?" she asked, still in his arms. "It looks like it." The decision comes next week. Martha, who was watching the scene with a maternal smile, commented, "My children, divine justice may be slow, but it always arrives." That night, for the first time since they had reunited, David and Sarah talked openly about their feelings. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. These days by your side have been the best I've had in 16 years. For me too, David. Being here, with you, with the kids, reminds me of who I really am." "And who are you really?" "A woman who loves this land, who loves life in the country, who loves you." David moved closer to her and took her hands. "Sarah, I know you have commitments in the city, a life you've built. I don't want to pressure you into making any hasty decisions." "David, I've already made my decision." "What is it?" "I broke up with Stephen. Yesterday over the phone. I explained that I realized I still love my first husband, and that it wouldn't be fair to continue a relationship divided." David was speechless for a few seconds. "And how did he react?" "It was sad, but understanding. He said he always knew there was a part of my heart that wasn't his, and that he'd rather see me happy with someone else than unhappy beside him." Sarah: "David, I want to come back. I want to try to rebuild our family, our life here. I know it won't be easy, that we have a lot to work out, but I want to try." David kissed her gently, and for the first time in 16 years, he felt his life was truly beginning again. The following week, the court decision came out. It was favorable on all points. The transactions were declared null and void. William Sterling was forced to return all properties acquired irregularly, and he also had to pay damages for the harm caused. The news spread quickly through the region. All the neighbors who had been wronged began to recover their land. William tried to appeal the decision, but the amount of evidence against him was overwhelming. In addition to the accusations of forgery and corruption, it was discovered that he had evaded taxes and committed other irregularities in his businesses. Within a few months, the businessman who had seemed so powerful lost everything. His companies went bankrupt, he was criminally prosecuted, and had to sell his personal assets to pay the damages. David, in turn, recovered not only his original property, but received a substantial settlement that allowed him to begin reconstruction immediately. The first thing he did was rebuild the main house. Jason coordinated the work, using his experience with construction and mechanics. Rachel planned the part of the property intended for raising animals. Sarah moved to the property permanently, bringing only some clothes and personal items. She said she wanted to start over from scratch, without carrying excess baggage from the past. The religious wedding took place 6 months later, in a simple ceremony on the property, celebrated by the town priest and attended by all the neighbors who had supported the fight for justice. Martha was invited to move into the main house, occupying a room that was specially adapted for her needs. She accepted, saying she had always dreamed of seeing that family reunited again. Jason decided to live permanently on the property, transferring his engineering studies to a closer college. Rachel continued her veterinary studies but spent every weekend on the farm, helping to plan the cattle raising. 1 year after recovering the property, the farm already had 50 head of cattle, a productive vegetable garden, and was beginning to generate enough income to sustain itself. David, at 46, felt renewed. He had recovered not only his property but his family, his dignity, and the chance to rebuild his life on solid foundations. During the evenings, when the whole family gathered on the porch of the rebuilt house to talk about the next day's plans, David reflected on everything they had faced: 16 years in prison, 16 years of family separation, years of fighting corruption and injustice. But in the end, love had been stronger than everything. Jason, now 25, had become a mature and responsible young man, capable of coordinating the farm's mechanical and administrative activities. Rachel, 23, brought modern technical knowledge about animal husbandry to the property, allowing the farm to be more productive and sustainable than in the past. Sarah, at 43, had discovered she never lost her rural identity. She returned to cooking on the wood stove, tending the vegetable garden, managing the household finances with the competence she always had. Martha, at 71, became the family's official matriarch, the wise counselor who helped resolve the small daily conflicts and safeguarded the memory of family traditions. 2 years after the rebuilding, the farm had become a model property in the region. Other farmers came to ask for advice on cattle management, soil conservation techniques, and family-based work organization. David Miller was often invited to give talks about overcoming adversity and starting over. His story had become an inspiration for other people facing seemingly insurmountable difficulties. But what made David most proud wasn't the farm's material success, nor the public recognition of his story. It was looking around the table during meals and seeing his family united, talking, planning the future, sharing joys and worries. During one of these meals, Rachel made an announcement that moved everyone. "Everyone, I have some news to share." "What news, dear?" asked Sarah. "I met a guy in college. He studies agronomy and wants to see our farm. Do you think I can bring him here next weekend?" David smiled. His daughter was in love, and by the sparkle in her eyes, it was a mutual feeling. "Of course, dear. It will be a pleasure to meet him." Jason also had news. "Dad, remember that neighbor, Mr. Thomas Brooks's daughter, Claudia? The one who's a teacher? That's the one. We started dating a few months ago. She loves country life and is helping me plan an environmental education project for the region." David looked at Sarah and saw in her eyes the same emotion he felt. Their children had become well-balanced adults, capable of forming healthy relationships and continuing family traditions. "And do you two plan to marry and have children here on the property?" asked Martha, always direct. "God willing, Grandma Martha," said Rachel. "I dream of raising my children in the same place where I grew up until I was 6. "And me too," said Jason. "I want my children to know their grandfather, to learn about the land, about honest work, about a united family." David stood up from the table, moved, and walked to the window overlooking the fields. The property was beautiful under the full moon. The cattle grazed peacefully, the crops grew healthy, the house was full of light and life. Sarah approached and placed her hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking it was worth it. All those years of suffering, all the struggle, were worth it to reach this moment. And I'm thinking the best is yet to come. Our children will marry, have children. This property will be passed to a new generation that knows the value of a united family." David turned and hugged his wife. "Sarah, thank you for coming back. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for never giving up, for fighting for the truth, for justice, for our family." Martha, who was watching the couple from the table, commented with satisfaction, "My children, you have taught me that there is no problem that love cannot solve if people are persevering and honest." That night, before going to sleep, David went out to the porch and looked at the stars. He mentally gave thanks for everything he had achieved. The family reunited, the property recovered, the chance for a fresh start. But mostly he was thankful for having learned that a person's true wealth is not in the amount of land they own, nor the money they have in the bank. It is in the quality of the relationships they build, the integrity with which they live, and the ability to get back up after every fall. At 48 years old, after 16 years in prison and 2 years fighting to recover his property, David had finally found peace. The farm was thriving, the family was united, and the future was full of possibilities. Rachel married her college classmate, an agronomist, and they settled on a part of the property, creating a specialized horse breeding area. Jason married Claudia, the teacher who was the neighbor's daughter, and together they developed an educational rural tourism project on the farm, hosting groups of urban students to learn about country life. Sarah and David renewed their wedding vows on their 25th anniversary in an emotional ceremony attended by all the neighbors who had supported them during the fight for justice. Mrs. Martha lived to be 82, long enough to meet 4 great-grandchildren and see the property transform into a prosperous model farm in the region. When she passed, she was buried in the small cemetery on the property next to David's parents. Her final request was that they always care for the family unity she had helped rebuild. The farm continued to grow and modernize, but always maintained the traditional values of honest work, family unity, and respect for the land. David lived to be 85, long enough to see his grandchildren become adults and start their own families. His story of overcoming continued to inspire people throughout the region. When his time came, he was surrounded by 3 generations of descendants, all working the same land he had lost and regained through much suffering and perseverance. His last words were to Sarah, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Thank you for building with me the most beautiful family anyone could dream of." The property remained in the family's hands, passed down from generation to generation, always remembering the story of how love and perseverance can overcome any adversity. End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe love and perseverance can overcome any obstacle? Share your experiences in the comments, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more moving and inspiring stories.